It was a day like any other in the halls of Capitol Hill, where politicians from around the world gathered to talk about important issues. Conversations buzzed about trade agreements, alliances, and how countries could work together better. But no one expected what happened next, a moment that would leave everyone talking. A representative from Japan, known for their calm and respectful speeches, stepped up to the podium. Everyone settled into their seats, ready to hear the usual diplomatic language they were used to. But this time, something different unfolded. Instead of sticking to neutral ground, the speaker launched into a sharp critique of former U.S. President Donald Trump. The room went silent as people processed what they were hearing. The Japanese official didn't hold back. They accused Trump of damaging America's reputation on the global stage with his unpredictable behavior and controversial policies. Words like divisive and reckless echoed through the chamber. For many in the audience, it felt like a punch to the gut. Some nodded in agreement while others shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. It wasn't just criticism, it was a direct attack, and it came at a time when tensions between nations were already running high. Sitting quietly among the crowd was Karoline Leavitt, a young but rising political figure who had made a name for herself as a strong supporter of conservative values. She was there to listen, but her mind raced as she absorbed every word. Her expression remained calm, almost unreadable, but inside, emotions swirled. Loyalty burned within her, not just loyalty to Trump, but to the principles he stood for, which resonated deeply with millions of Americans. Leavitt grew up in a military family, moving from base to base as a child. Those experiences shaped her worldview early on. She understood the complexities of international relations and the sacrifices required to keep peace. So when she heard the accusations against Trump, she couldn't stay silent. To her, this wasn't just about defending one man. It was about standing up for the ideas that defined an entire movement. As the speech wrapped up, murmurs filled the room. People turned to each other, whispering about what had just happened. Reporters scrambled to jot down notes, sensing a story brewing, and all eyes eventually landed on Leavitt. What would she do? Would she let the comments slide, or would she respond? No one knew yet, but anticipation hung thick in the air. Later that evening, Leavitt retreated to her office, shutting the door behind her. Papers were scattered across her desk, and her computer screen glowed softly in the dim light. She sat down, took a deep breath, and began typing. Her fingers flew over the keyboard as she drafted her response. This wasn't going to be some generic statement. Oh no, she wanted her words to pack a punch, to make people sit up and take notice. She thought carefully about how to frame her argument. While she admired Trump's leadership style, she knew she couldn't rely solely on emotion. Facts mattered, especially in situations like this. So, she pulled out data showing how Trump's administration had renegotiated key trade deals, strengthened partnerships, and taken bold steps to protect American interests abroad. She also reflected on the importance of mutual respect in diplomacy, making sure her tone struck the right balance between firmness and fairness. Hours passed, and the clock ticked closer to midnight. But Leavitt didn't stop working. Every sentence was crafted with intention, every phrase chosen to resonate with both domestic audiences and international observers. By the time she finally hit save, exhaustion weighed heavily on her shoulders. But she felt ready to face whatever came next. Little did she know, her response would ignite a firestorm of reactions. People everywhere would soon be talking about her rebuttal, dissecting her words, and debating whether she'd gone too far or not far enough. But for now, Leavitt allowed herself a small smile. She had done what she believed was right, and that gave her a sense of peace. Whatever happened tomorrow, she was prepared to stand by her convictions. The morning after the explosive speech, the air was thick with tension. Karoline Leavitt walked into the Capitol building, her presence immediately drawing attention. Reporters were already waiting for her, microphones in hand, eager to get a reaction. They surrounded her like a swarm, firing questions faster than she could process. "What did you think of the Japanese representative's comments?" one asked. Are you planning to respond? Another chimed in. Leavitt paused for a moment, her face calm but unreadable. She wasn't someone who rushed into things without thinking, and this situation was no exception. Instead of blurting out an emotional reply, she gave a small, knowing smile. Stay tuned, she said simply, before walking away with quiet confidence. Those two words, stay tuned, were enough to send reporters scrambling back to their desks to write headlines speculating about what might come next. Behind closed doors, however, Leavitt was anything but calm. Her office was alive with activity as she worked late into the night, preparing her response. Papers were spread across her desk, coffee cups lined up like soldiers, and her computer screen glowed faintly in the dim light. This wasn't just about crafting a statement. It was about finding the perfect balance between defending her beliefs and maintaining professionalism. She knew that whatever she said would be scrutinized not only by the media, but also by world leaders, political analysts, and everyday citizens. Her team was there too, offering advice and brainstorming ideas. Some urged caution, warning her not to escalate tensions further. You don't want to burn bridges, one advisor said gently. Another suggested focusing on the positive aspects of Trump's presidency rather than directly attacking the Japanese representative. But Leavitt had made up her mind. She wasn't going to shy away from addressing the accusations head-on. Still, she listened carefully to their input, weighing each suggestion before deciding how to proceed. As she sat at her desk, pen in hand, Leavitt thought deeply about why this moment mattered so much to her. It wasn't just about loyalty to Trump. It went deeper than that. Growing up in a military family had taught her the value of standing up for what you believe in, even when it's hard. She remembered moving from base to base as a child, watching her parents dedicate their lives to serving their country. Those experiences shaped her understanding of sacrifice and duty, instilling in her a sense of responsibility to speak out when she saw something wrong. She also reflected on the impact these kinds of criticisms could have on ordinary people. To many Americans, Trump wasn't just a politician. He represented hope, change, and a break from the status quo. For them, hearing him criticized on such a public stage felt personal. Leavitt wanted her response to resonate with those individuals, to remind them that their voices mattered. At the same time, she understood the importance of diplomacy and the need to maintain respectful relationships with other nations. Striking that balance wasn't easy, but she was determined to try. By the time she finally finished drafting her statement, the sun was beginning to rise outside her window. Exhaustion tugged at her eyelids, but there was a fire in her chest that wouldn't let her rest. She read over her words one last time, making sure they conveyed exactly what she wanted to say. The tone was firm but measured, passionate, yet respectful. She didn't want to come across as defensive or angry. Instead, she aimed to present a clear, logical argument backed by facts. One section of her statement stood out to her as particularly powerful. In it, she acknowledged the importance of constructive criticism in international relations, but argued that dismissing an entire administration's efforts was unfair. Under President Trump, she wrote, our nation renegotiated trade deals that benefited workers, strengthened alliances that had grown weak, and took bold steps to protect our sovereignty. These accomplishments shouldn't be overlooked or dismissed lightly. When she finally hit save, a wave of relief washed over her. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be backlash, debates, and endless analysis of every word she said. But she also knew she had done her best to prepare. As she leaned back in her chair, sipping the last cold dregs of her coffee, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. This wasn't just about politics. It was about principles. About standing up for what you believe in, even when it feels like the whole world is against you. And while she couldn't predict how her response would be received, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing she had stayed true to herself. The next step was delivering her message, and she was ready. With her notes in hand and her resolve, stronger than ever, Leavitt stepped out of her office, prepared to face the storm. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing for certain: she wouldn't back down. The day had finally arrived. Karoline Leavitt stood backstage, taking slow, deliberate breaths as she prepared to step into the spotlight. The room ahead was packed, politicians, reporters, and diplomats all waiting to hear what she would say. She adjusted her suit jacket, straightened her posture, and reminded herself of why she was doing this. This wasn't just about defending a former president. It was about standing up for millions of people who believed in the same principles. She did. As she walked onto the stage, the room fell silent. All eyes were on her. Some faces looked curious, others skeptical, but none were indifferent. Leavitt approached the podium with steady steps, her heels clicking softly against the floor. She placed her hands firmly on the edges of the lectern and took a moment to scan the crowd. It was a small gesture, but it helped ground her. Then, with a calm yet commanding voice, she began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," she started, "diplomacy is built on mutual respect. Constructive criticism has its place, and open dialogue is essential for progress. But there's a difference between offering thoughtful feedback and making sweeping generalizations that undermine hard work and achievements." Her opening line set the tone. She wasn't coming in swinging wildly. Instead, she chose to start with diplomacy, acknowledging the importance of respectful conversation. But everyone in the room knew this wasn't going to be a soft response. They could feel the intensity behind her words, and they leaned forward, slightly, hanging on every syllable. Leavitt continued, her voice growing firmer as she addressed the accusations head-on. "It is disingenuous to paint America's leadership under President Trump with such broad strokes. Yes, he was unconventional. Yes, his style challenged norms. But let's not forget the substance, the real results that came from his administration." She paused briefly, letting those words sink in. The room remained eerily quiet, save for the faint sound of pens scribbling furiously in notebooks. Reporters hung on her every word, knowing this was the moment everyone had been waiting for. "For years, we heard complaints about unfair trade, deals that hurt American workers," she said, her tone shifting to one of determination. "Under President Trump, we renegotiated NAFTA into the USMMA, a deal that prioritized American jobs and industries. We stood up to China's unfair practices and imposed tariffs to protect our economy. These weren't empty promises. They were actions that delivered tangible benefits." Her voice carried conviction, each sentence punctuated with clarity and purpose. She didn't just rattle off facts, she wove them into a narrative that painted a picture of progress. Her delivery was so compelling that even some of her critics found themselves nodding along, if only briefly. But she didn't stop there. Leavitt went on to address another key point: alliances. "Some have accused President Trump of weakening international partnerships, yet during his time in office, NATO members increased their defense spending significantly, a long overdue shift that strengthened collective security. He brokered historic peace agreements in the Middle East through the Abraham Accords, bringing nations together in ways many thought impossible. Every claim she made was backed by evidence, and she presented it with confidence. Her arguments weren't just about countering criticism. They were about reminding people of the bigger picture. She wanted her audience to see beyond the headlines and focus on the outcomes. Then, with a subtle shift in tone, she turned her attention to the Japanese representative's remarks. To suggest that America's leadership under President Trump damaged our global standing ignores the reality of what was accomplished. It dismisses the courage it took to challenge outdated systems and advocate for fairness on behalf of the American people. If speaking truth to power and putting your country first is seen as reckless, then perhaps we need to redefine what true leadership looks like. The room erupted into murmurs. Some attendees nodded approvingly, while others exchanged uneasy glances. Social media lit up almost instantly. Clips of her speech spread like wildfire, with hashtags like #clapback and Stand with Leavitt trending within minutes. Supporters praised her boldness, calling her a champion for American values. Critics, however, accused her of being too confrontational, arguing that her response risked escalating tensions further. Yet Leavitt didn't flinch. She ended her speech with a call for unity, urging everyone to focus on collaboration rather than division. "We may not always agree, but we must never lose sight of our shared goals: peace, prosperity, and partnership. Let us move forward." with respect and understanding, building bridges instead of walls. When she finished speaking, the room erupted into applause. Not everyone clapped. Some sat stone-faced, clearly unhappy, but the majority responded with enthusiasm. Leavitt stepped back from the podium, her expression calm but resolute. She had said what she came to say, and she had done so with precision and passion. Backstage, her team greeted her with wide smiles and pats on the back. "You nailed it," one of them said, relief evident in their voice. Another added, "That's going to make waves." And they were right. It already was. Phones buzzed nonstop with notifications, and TV screens across the globe replayed snippets of her speech. Despite the whirlwind of reactions, Leavitt remained composed. She knew this was just the beginning. While the immediate aftermath brought praise and criticism alike, she understood that the real test would come in the days ahead. How would world leaders respond? Would her words help mend fences or create new rifts? For now, though, she allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. As she sipped a glass of water and reviewed the notes she'd prepared, she reflected on the weight of what she had just done. Standing up for her beliefs wasn't easy, especially on such a public stage, but she felt a deep sense of fulfillment knowing she had stayed true to her principles. The road ahead wouldn't be smooth, but Leavitt was ready. She had faced the storm head-on, and no matter what challenges lay ahead, she knew she had planted a flag in the ground. Her message was clear. America's strength lies in its ability to stand firm while extending a hand in friendship, and she intended to keep fighting for both. The days following Karoline Leavitt's fiery rebuttal were nothing short of a whirlwind. News outlets around the world dissected her speech, replaying key moments and analyzing every word she said. Social media was ablaze with reactions, some praising her boldness, others criticizing her tone. It seemed like everyone had an opinion, and those opinions were as varied as they were passionate. In Japan, the government issued a formal statement expressing disappointment over what they described as unnecessary escalation. The Japanese representative who had sparked the controversy remained largely silent, but sources close to them hinted at frustration over how their original remarks had been interpreted. Some diplomats argued that Leavitt's response was too aggressive, warning that it could strain relations between the two nations. Others, however, quietly admitted that her points about Trump's achievements were hard to ignore. Back in the United States, political analysts debated whether Leavitt's actions had helped or hurt America's standing on the global stage. Critics accused her of being overly confrontational, suggesting that her words might alienate key allies. They pointed out that diplomacy often required finesse, not force, and worried that her approach could set a dangerous precedent for future interactions. Supporters, on the other hand, applauded her courage, saying she had done exactly what needed to be done, standing up for American values without backing down. For Leavitt, the backlash came as no surprise. She knew that speaking out wouldn't win her universal approval, but she also understood the importance of staying true to her convictions. Instead of retreating into silence, she leaned into the controversy, giving interviews and engaging directly with both supporters and critics. In one particularly memorable appearance on a popular news show, she addressed the concerns head-on. "I get it," she said, leaning forward slightly as the host asked about the potential fallout from her remarks. "People are worried about damaging relationships, and I take that seriously. But here's the thing. Respect is a two-way street. You can't expect someone to sit quietly when they feel attacked, especially when the accusations aren't based. In fact, my response wasn't about starting a fight, it was about setting the record straight." Her answer resonated with many viewers who appreciated her honesty and willingness to engage in tough conversations. Yet, behind the scenes, Leavitt worked tirelessly to ensure that tensions didn't spiral out of control. She reached out to diplomats privately, explaining her perspective while emphasizing her commitment to maintaining strong ties with Japan and other allies. Her team helped coordinate meetings where she listened more than she spoke, seeking common ground and reassuring partners that her intentions weren't hostile. One such meeting took place in a quiet conference room at the State Department. Around the table sat representatives from several countries, all eager to hear what Leavitt had to say. As she entered the room, there was a palpable sense of curiosity mixed with caution. Would she double down on her earlier statements, or would she soften her stance? Leavitt chose a middle path. She began by acknowledging the concerns raised by her critics, admitting that her words may have come across as harsh to some. "I'm not perfect," she said with a small smile, "and I know my tone might have rubbed people the wrong way. That wasn't my intention. What I wanted was to highlight the accomplishments of the Trump administration because I believe they deserve recognition." She then pivoted to a broader discussion about collaboration, urging everyone at the table to focus on shared goals rather than differences. "At the end of the day, we all want the same things: peace, prosperity, and stability. Let's work together to achieve those goals, even if we don't always agree on the methods." Her words struck a chord. By the end of the meeting, several participants approached her to shake her hand, thanking her for taking the time to listen and clarify her position. While not everyone walked away fully convinced, there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. Tensions eased, at least temporarily, and lines of communication remained open. Despite these efforts, the diplomatic ripple effects continued. Allies of the United States weighed in, offering mixed reactions. Some praised Leavitt's defense of American interests, calling it a necessary reminder of the country's strength and resolve. Others urged restraint, cautioning against letting emotions overshadow reason. The debate spilled over into international forums with discussions about leadership styles and the role of criticism in diplomacy dominating agendas. Amidst the chaos, Leavitt found herself reflecting on the bigger picture. Late one evening, after another long day of meetings and media appearances, she sat alone in her office. The lights were dim, and the hum of the city outside her window provided a soothing backdrop. She stared at the stack of papers on her desk, each one representing a different challenge or opportunity. Her mind wandered back to her childhood, growing up in a military family. She remembered the sacrifices her parents made, the long deployments, the constant moving, the unwavering dedication to something greater than themselves. Those memories shaped her understanding of duty and responsibility, teaching her that leadership wasn't just about making noise. It was about finding solutions even when the path forward wasn't clear. As she thought about the recent events, she realized that her response to the Japanese representative's comments wasn't just about defending Trump. It was about defending the principles he stood for. Principles like fairness, accountability, and putting your country first. To her, those ideals transcended politics. They were about protecting the dreams and aspirations of millions of people who believed in a better future. But she also recognized the complexity of navigating international relations. Diplomacy wasn't black and white. It was messy, nuanced, and full of gray areas. And while she stood firmly by her decision to speak out, she vowed to learn from the experience. Moving forward, she promised herself that she would continue advocating for policies that prioritized unity without compromising conviction. By the time she finally left the office that night, exhaustion weighed heavily on her shoulders. Yet, despite the fatigue, there was a spark of determination in her eyes. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more challenges, more debates, and more moments that tested her resolve. But she also knew one thing for certain. She had planted a flag in the ground, and she wasn't going to let anyone knock it down. As she stepped into the cool night air, she allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. The lights of the city twinkled around her, a reminder of the countless lives affected by decisions made in rooms like the ones she'd spent her day in. For Leavitt, this wasn't just about politics, it was about people, about standing up for what you believe in, even when it felt like the whole world was watching. And as she walked toward her car, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever came next, she was ready to face it head-on. The storm wasn't over yet. While the immediate frenzy surrounding Karoline Leavitt's rebuttal had begun to settle, its echoes lingered in every corner of her life. Days turned into weeks, and though the headlines slowly shifted to other topics, the ripple effects of her bold response continued to shape her days and nights. Late one evening, after a particularly grueling day of meetings and interviews, Leavitt found herself alone in her study. The room was quiet except for the faint ticking of a clock on the wall. Papers were scattered across her desk, remnants of debates she'd participated in earlier that day. Her laptop sat open, glowing softly with unread emails and news alerts. She leaned back in her chair, letting out a long sigh as she massaged her temples. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was stillness. And in that stillness, her thoughts drifted. She thought about how far she'd come since those early days growing up in a military family. Moving from base to base as a child, she learned quickly that stability wasn't guaranteed. What stayed constant, however, was her parents' unwavering sense of duty. They taught her that leadership meant more than just giving orders or making speeches. It meant stepping up when things got tough, even if it meant standing alone. Those lessons came rushing back now, as she reflected on the choices she'd made over the past few weeks. Speaking out against the Japanese representative's comments hadn't been an easy decision. It required courage, yes, but also a willingness to face criticism. Some people called her brave. Others accused her of being reckless. Both perspectives weighed heavily on her mind. Leavitt picked up a pen and began doodling absent-mindedly on a notepad. As she scribbled, she replayed moments from the past weeks in her head, the heated arguments, the tense negotiations, the endless media appearances. Each interaction had been a test, pushing her to balance passion with patience, conviction with compromise. She knew she hadn't always gotten it perfect. There were times when her frustration showed too clearly, when her tone came across sharper than intended. But she also recognized that perfection wasn't the goal. Progress was. Her thoughts turned to the people who had reached out to her during this time. Supporters, colleagues, even strangers. Messages poured in from all over the country, many expressing gratitude for her defense of Trump's legacy. One email stood out in particular. A retired factory worker wrote to thank her for reminding him why he'd voted for Trump in the first place. "You gave voice to what so many of us have been feeling," he wrote. "We're proud of you." Reading those words had brought tears to her eyes. It wasn't the praise that moved her. It was the realization that her actions had resonated with real people, individuals whose lives had been impacted by the policies she defended. In that moment, she understood something profound. This wasn't just about politics. It was about people. About standing up for those who felt their voices weren't being heard. But it wasn't all positive feedback. Critics were vocal too, accusing her of prioritizing loyalty to Trump over diplomatic harmony. One op-ed described her as reckless and warned that her approach could damage America's global reputation. Another commentator called her remarks a step backward for international relations. These critiques stung, not because they attacked her personally, but because they challenged her belief that truth-telling and diplomacy could coexist. As she mulled over these opposing viewpoints, Leavitt realized something else. Growth often comes from discomfort. Every challenge she faced forced her to think deeper, to question her assumptions and to refine her perspective. She didn't agree with everything her critics said, but she appreciated the opportunity to reflect. If anything, the backlash only strengthened her resolve to find common ground where possible, and to stand firm where necessary. That night, as she sat in her study, she decided to write down 3 key lessons she'd taken away from the experience. First, she wrote, "Leadership isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about confronting challenges head-on while striving for solutions." Second, every action has consequences, so weigh them carefully, but don't let fear of criticism paralyze you. And third, true strength lies in balancing conviction with compassion. By the time she finished jotting down her thoughts, a sense of clarity washed over her. This chapter of her life had been intense, exhausting, and at times overwhelming. But it had also been transformative. She emerged from it with a deeper understanding of herself and the world around her. More importantly, she emerged with a renewed commitment to serving others, not just through words but through action. The next morning, Leavitt woke up feeling lighter, as if a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. She dressed quickly, grabbed a cup of coffee, and headed to Capitol Hill. As she walked through the bustling halls, she noticed how different everything felt. The same reporters who had once hounded her for sound bites now greeted her with nods of respect. Colleagues who had doubted her ability to navigate such a high-stakes situation approached her with compliments. Even some of her harshest critics seemed to soften, acknowledging the effort she'd made to mend fences. Later that afternoon, she attended a bipartisan meeting focused on strengthening trade partnerships. Sitting around the table were representatives from various countries, including Japan. When it was her turn to speak, she kept her remarks concise and constructive, emphasizing collaboration rather than confrontation. Her tone was calm, her demeanor professional. By the end of the session, several participants thanked her for her input, noting how much they appreciated her balanced approach. It was a small victory, but one that mattered deeply to her. In that moment, she realized that diplomacy wasn't about winning arguments. It was about building bridges that allowed nations to move forward together despite their differences. And while she wouldn't shy away from defending her beliefs, she vowed to do so in a way that fostered understanding rather than division. That evening, as she drove home, she rolled down the car window and let the cool breeze wash over her face. The city lights blurred past, a reminder of how fast-paced and unpredictable life in politics could be. Yet amidst the chaos, she felt grounded. Grounded in her values, her purpose, and her determination to make a difference. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be smooth. There would always be critics, always be challenges, always be moments that tested her resolve. But she also knew she had grown stronger because of them. Stronger, wiser, and more committed than ever to fighting for what she believed in. As she pulled into her driveway and stepped out of the car, she paused for a moment, looking up at the stars. Somewhere out there, beyond the noise and the headlines, were millions of people counting on leaders like her to guide them through uncertain times. For Karoline Leavitt, that thought was both humbling and empowering. Whatever came next, she was ready to rise to the occasion. Weeks had passed since the fiery exchange on Capitol Hill, and the dust was finally starting to settle. The headlines that once screamed about Karoline Leavitt's bold rebuttal had given way to new stories, election updates, economic forecasts, and global crises demanding attention. But for Leavitt, this wasn't the end of a chapter. It was the beginning of something bigger. What had started as a single moment of defiance had transformed into a defining period in her career, one that would shape how people saw her and how she saw herself. Leavitt began to notice subtle changes in the way others treated her. Colleagues, who had previously dismissed her as just another rising politician, now approached her with a newfound respect. They admired her willingness to stand firm under pressure, even when it meant facing backlash. Invitations poured in from prestigious forums and think tanks eager to hear her speak. Her phone buzzed constantly with requests for interviews, panel appearances, and keynote speeches. It seemed like everyone wanted to know what she thought, not only about foreign policy but also about leadership, resilience, and the future of American politics. At first, the sudden surge of attention felt overwhelming. Leavitt wasn't someone who craved the spotlight, and she worried about losing sight of her priorities amidst all the noise. But as she navigated this new reality, she reminded herself why she had entered public service in the first place: to make a difference. And if using her platform could amplify voices that might otherwise go unheard, then she owed it to herself, and to those counting on her, to embrace the opportunity. One invitation stood out among the rest. A prominent international conference asked her to deliver a speech on the importance of balancing conviction with collaboration in modern diplomacy. The event would bring together leaders from around the world, offering her a chance to share her perspective on a global stage. For Leavitt, it was both an honor and a challenge. She knew her words would carry weight, and she didn't take that responsibility lightly. As she prepared for the conference, she spent hours reflecting on everything she'd learned over the past few weeks. She thought about the Japanese representatives' initial critique, her own response, and the delicate dance of diplomacy that followed. She considered the feedback she'd received, the praise, the criticism, the constructive advice, and realized that every interaction had taught her something valuable. On the day of the conference, Leavitt stood backstage waiting for her turn to speak. The venue was packed, filled with dignitaries, diplomats, and journalists. The energy in the room was electric, buzzing with anticipation. As she stepped onto the stage, the applause washed over her, louder than she expected. She took a deep breath, smiled warmly at the audience, and began to speak. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I'm honored to be here today, surrounded by so many incredible minds working tirelessly to create a better world. But let me start by saying this. Leadership is hard. It's messy, unpredictable, and often thankless. Yet it's also one of the most rewarding things we can do for ourselves, for our communities, and for generations to come." Her opening lines set the tone for what would become one of the most memorable speeches of her career. She spoke candidly about the challenges of navigating complex relationships in an increasingly interconnected world. She acknowledged the tension between standing up for your beliefs and fostering unity, admitting that finding balance wasn't easy. But she emphasized that it was possible, with effort, empathy, and a commitment to listening. "When I responded to the criticisms leveled against my country," she continued, "I did so because I believed it was necessary, not because I wanted to provoke or divide, but because I wanted to remind us all of the power of truth-telling. Yes, it can be uncomfortable. Yes, it can spark disagreement. But avoiding difficult conversations doesn't solve problems. It delays them." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "That said, I've also learned that truth-telling alone isn't enough. We must pair it with action, with a genuine desire to understand where others are coming from, even when we don't agree. Because at the heart of every negotiation, every alliance, every partnership is a shared goal, a better future for everyone." Her message resonated deeply with the audience. Heads nodded in agreement, and several attendees scribbled notes as she spoke. When she finished, the applause was thunderous, lasting far longer than protocol required. People lined up afterward to shake her hand, congratulate her, and ask follow-up questions. One attendee, a senior diplomat from Europe, pulled her aside to say, "You've given us all something to think about, thank you." The success of the speech marked a turning point for Leavitt. No longer was she simply seen as a staunch defender of conservative values. She was now viewed as a thoughtful, pragmatic leader capable of bridging divides. Speculation about her political future grew louder, with some suggesting she might run for higher office. Others predicted she could play a key role in shaping America's foreign policy for years to come. But Leavitt remained focused on the present. She didn't let the hype distract her from the work that needed to be done. Instead, she channeled her newfound influence into initiatives aimed at empowering everyday citizens. She launched a series of town halls across the country, inviting people from all walks of life to share their concerns and ideas. She partnered with organizations focused on workforce development, education reform, and veterans' rights, ensuring that her actions aligned with her rhetoric. Through it all, she stayed grounded by leaning on the lessons she'd learned along the way. She remembered the importance of staying true to her principles while remaining open to growth. She recalled the value of humility, recognizing that no one had all the answers. And she never forgot the faces of the people she met during her travels. The factory worker grateful for renewed trade deals, the veteran seeking support after years of service, the young student dreaming of a brighter tomorrow. These individuals reminded her why she fought so hard in the first place. Months later, as she sat in her office late one evening, Leavitt reflected on how much had changed since that fateful day on Capitol Hill. The controversy had tested her in ways she couldn't have imagined, forcing her to confront doubts, fears, and uncertainties. But it had also revealed her strength, resilience, and capacity for growth. Most importantly, it had reaffirmed her belief in the power of standing up for what you believe in, even when it feels like the whole world is watching. As she turned off the lights and headed home, she felt a quiet sense of pride. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, and there would undoubtedly be more storms to weather. But she was ready to face whatever came next with courage, compassion, and conviction. Because for Karoline Leavitt, this wasn't just about building a legacy, it was about leaving the world a little better than she found it, and that, she decided, was worth every challenge along the way.